covering the Taiping Rebellion. If you're unaware, this was the third bloodiest war in history, of over 70 million dead. A very fascinating conflict that no one's really ever heard of. So I'm going to be covering it today, and hopefully you will get a better idea of what happened. So starting off, we've got two flags here of the two opposing powers. The dragon on the left, the one facing towards the little sun that it's chasing, is the flag of the Qing dynasty. The Qing, or spelt Qing, pronounced Qing, was a very famous ruling dynasty in China, the last imperial dynasty of China, because, well, the nationalists came next, and then after them came the communists. And I'm not certain if you're aware of politics and political ideologies, but communism doesn't really like monarchies. On the right-hand side, in the forward-facing dragon, that is kind of creepy, is the flag of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, which was the instigators of the rebellion itself, and were a very, very interesting little nation. And this war is genuinely, it's got some of the wackiest stuff happening in this. Honestly, you wouldn't believe that this happened with no historical context. Yes, Polish child. The chat, so the lessons I see, but of course the text chat is not I see. Because that's what it was for ages, wasn't it? I remember it. Yes, because I remember you ordained it was IC. I remember you doing that. The chat is not. The chat is not. It was started... Yes, it was started as an OOC thing, but then we decided to make it IC for reasons. Because, yeah, the head of the intelligence service is definitely going to provide historical lectures. Anyhow, let's make a move on and not get sidetracked like last time, because that ended really well, didn't it? Now then, let's continue. So first of all, here's a map of China in the 19th century. If you're a fucking idiot and don't know how the century system works, this is the 1800s, not the 1900s. Now, this is a map of China. The little black line around here shows the extent of the Qing dynasty at its height. And now, don't tell the communists, but it's actually larger than what China is today. So, yeah, bigger. It's more thick. Now, you get a lot of very interesting historical context in this. So, for example, up here is Manchuria and Inner Mongolia. All this is where the Manchus come from. They're an ethnic group who live in Manchuria, originating from this little area. This was the extent of the Han Empire, one of the most famous dynasties and most impactful. Indeed, the modern dominating Chinese ethnicity is still Han Chinese. And this area in the sort of pasty colour is the extent of their empire, and also the extent of the Ming dynasty, which came before the Qing. And interestingly, the second bloodiest war in history, just above this one, was the Qing invasion of the Ming and them taking over. And then this was sort of what the empire ended up looking like. All this in green, all this here, and Taiwan, with all these little nations here, Burma, Tonkin, which is Vietnam, Laos, Siam, Laos is Cambodia, Nepal, and Korea, all being little client states around it, and them just, doing stuff. Now, moving on, we have the origins of the rebellion. Now, the Qing dynasty in 1850 wasn't in its best point. The British opium trade had all but ruined the livelihoods of most of their citizens, and they were very much stagnating quite a bit. As well as this, the high levels of government, which were dominated by the Manchus, since the ruling Qing dynasty was from Manchuria, were very corrupt. We're speaking of corruption of the likes unseen since the days of the 12 eunuchs of the Han dynasty, who ended up causing yet another rebellion. China has a real problem with corruption. Now, pictured here is the reigning emperor at the time. This is the Zhang Feng emperor. And this little man, Hong Xiaoquan, he's got some big ideas. Now, this all starts, our little tale here, starts in January 1850. Now, Hong here has, he wants to go do some job. So he applies to join the imperial ministries. He gets rejected because he's a bit dumb. So he gets sad. So he goes home and he has a vision. He basically has a fever dream, and then he comes out and he announces to the world that he is none other than the brother of Jesus Christ. Yeah, this random Chinese man has proclaimed himself the brother of Jesus, and by extension, another son of God. So, interesting, we've got a new Messiah showing up, and he founds a group called the God Worshipping Society. And guess what these guys do? They worship God. Now, the way they do this is by committing ethnic genocide. And essentially, they're busy doing stuff, forming their own version of Christianity called Taiping Christianity. Right. D5. What did Mr. Hong Xiuquan proclaim himself to be?
Darth, I'm trying to do schoolwork. I'm just here so I can be. Please don't hurt me.
Yes, thank you, Defender 4. You were paying attention at least. But, that was sort of the reason I was asking Defender 5.
I told you 3 times I can't pay attention. Leave me alone.
He and his friends went out and did guerrilla warfare, partisan activities, etc. And it just sort of pissed off the Qing dynasty. Because, they don't like that shit. Now, this was all in the south, namely in the province of Guangxi. And this is when it all really kicks off. In January 1851, the Qing dynasty sends in a detachment of troops to sort of break up some operations by the God Worshipping Society. They engage in battle with them, a 10,000 strong battalion of God Worshipping Society members clash against the forces and win. And following this, the rebellion begins. They gather massive support from the south, who really hate the Qing, and more importantly, they hate the Manchu. And they essentially carve a path of total destruction through the north, carrying out mass murders of Manchu and Qing loyalists wherever they find them. Walking up, basically just went into towns and just massacred anyone who looked like a Manchu. Not nice stuff. And their army grew and grew and grew, until the big turning point of this is the capturing of the citadel of Anqing, which would be sieged many, many times during the war. With the capital of Anqing, the Qing sort of realized that this rebellion had really gotten strong. They realized that, shit was hitting the fan. This wasn't just some little provincial rebellion. This was a full-blown, massive insurrection, and had formed its own secessionist state, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, which in fact outnumbered the Qing. The Taiping Heavenly Kingdom had 2 million soldiers at its height, the Qing forces had 1 million serving in their banner armies. Now, and this happened quite a bit, including the recruitment of triad members, including Hong Daquan, who apparently, we're not certain of this because he may have just been lying. We don't actually have historical records since following the fall of the kingdom, the Qing sort of burned all their documents and their ledgers, so we don't know what was going on. But he claimed he was the co-king of heaven in their kingdom. He may have lied, though. And this is when we really get into the third bloodiest war in history, which is the rebellion. Pictured here are several scenes. As you can see, these are some clashes in the streets, very, very common during the sieges against the forces. You've got the Qing backing forces up here fighting against the Manchu, fighting against the Taiping forces. Here is pictured the siege of Anqing. As you can see, the Taiping banners are flying over it, and the Qing forces are advancing. Lots of dead, lots of destruction, sieging the city. And over here, you've got Hong Xiaoquan himself overseeing a massive movement of his troops. Now, this war really begins to get into its gritty phases following March 18th, 1853, following the fall of Nanjing. And those of you with a rudimentary knowledge of history, so none of you, will know that Nanjing is a very important city in China. It was the capital of nationalist China. The KMT made it their capital, and was also home to the Rape of Nanking, which was when the Japanese stormed it and...
Nani?
Hello. We were just discussing the Rape of Nanking. Nanjing. Very nasty stuff happened in there. Now, following this, the war sort of got entrenched. Taiping forces continually attempted to advance and expand, and they did. However, around this time, most of their efforts were centered around holding their territory, and also on internal problems. Hong Xiaoquan became extremely paranoid, and this can be best culminated and summarized in the 1856 Taiping incident, where he sort of executed one of his top advisors and followers and had his whole family killed. And then another guy complained and his whole family was shot. There was a lot of murder and genocide and not very nice stuff. And there was tons of these sieges. For example, Nanjing was under siege for 7 years. 7 bloody years. For context, little context for you. Leningrad was under siege for around 3 years. Stalingrad for 2. Leningrad had people resorting to cannibalism in the streets to survive. This siege was 7 years. Yeah. I think you should start to see why Defender 5. What happened in the 1856 Tangjing incident? And I don't want any of you guys to answer this.
Fuck off!
And he's gone. Wow. Hello, Mezzo.
Hello.
U9. What happened on the 1856 Tangjing incident?
I'll mute my mic and just listen to Darth giving history.
No? Do you not remember it anymore? Were you too busy discussing?
No, I was listening, but I just forgot.
See. Very well. I guess that can be ignored. So, following the siege of Nanjing, you also had the formation of the Xian army in the west, which was well, that'll become very, very relevant later. Doesn't do that much now, but does quite a bit later on. And now we have the fall of the Heavenly Kingdom. And we also have the creation of this very humbly named force called the Ever Victorious Army. Now, the Ever Victorious Army was headed by this man, Gordon Pasha, Charles Gordon, Governor General of the Sudan, absolute Chad, and extremely able British military commander, famous for not only his command of the Ever Victorious Army, but also for the Siege of Khartoum and various other things. He is one of the most fascinating men in British history. His death at the Siege of Khartoum, 2 days before reinforcements arrived, is quite a tragedy, and he's a very fascinating character. Very fascinating. Very interesting. But this isn't about Gordon Pasha. This is about the rebellion. Now, his force, the Ever Victorious Army, was a Qing army, which he and the British advisors with him, because at this point the British army had become involved in the war. Because essentially we saw that Taiping Heavenly Kingdom was really, really wacky. And so they decided to support the Qing. So by supporting the Qing, we basically ended up creating the Ever Victorious Army, who, as you might be able to tell from their name, continually won. And this is the turning point of the rebellion. The Taiping assault on Shanghai was repulsed. And not just repulsed, decisively repulsed, which is an extreme rarity during this war. Yeah, the Qing forces won, and they repelled the Taiping forces. And at this point, the British go on the counterattack. Well, the Qing do, with British assistance. Anqing falls the next year because the British Navy shows up and shows them why Britannia rules the waves, and helps Qing forces march in and capture the city. The Ever Victorious Army then essentially just marches south, destroying Taiping armies wherever they find them, just annihilating them, and they end up marching down to just cutting a swathe through the Taiping forces. And this is when the Xian army comes in now. The Xian army formed in the west. They were entirely comprised of Qing forces, and they're basically made of a bunch of peasants who decided, fuck the Tai Qing, they're insane. And they launched a massive offensive eastwards, and they in fact managed to surround and besiege Nanjing in June 1854, and that begins the 7-year siege. And this culminates when big man Hong Zhaoquan, he dies. Now, this man, who is self-proclaimed the Son of God, brother of Jesus, essentially says, "Fear not, my followers, for God will defend our great city." A couple of weeks later, he eats some bad mushrooms and dies. Yeah, he died of food poisoning. And as with all states where you're led by so when your state, which is entirely built around your leader being the Son of God and brother of Jesus, and then he dies from something as pathetic as some bad food, well, it sort of just, disintegrates. And that's what happens. Nanjing falls within the week. Xian forces march in and seize it, and then they do something very interesting to Hong's corpse. Essentially, he got entombed in the Ming Dynasty palace burial yards, where all the Ming emperors were buried. So the Xian forces walk in, they dig up his corpse, They verify it's him. They then burn the corpse, get the ashes, and then fire the ashes out of a cannon because they really hated this guy. Following that, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom just collapses, essentially. Qing forces overrun all their lands, their forces just completely dissipate, and they are crushed. The last Taiping force is destroyed in January 1866. Now, I'm going to get on to the question I'm certain all of you have. Why the hell did so many people die? You know, there's been many, many wars throughout history. This doesn't really seem any different, any special, you know, apart from all the wacky stuff. So why is it the third bloodiest war in history with around 70 million casualties? Well, this is what we're going to be finding out here. A big part was the way the war was fought. These Chinese... one second, please. The forces here... Yes, my dog's getting... My mother's taking him out for a walk, so he's barking. He does that a lot. Whenever he wants something, he barks. Whenever he's excited, he barks. Whenever he's upset because my mum goes out to buy shopping or something, he barks. Then I have to pick him up. He's really needy. He is really needy. And that is a very accurate... Well, no, it's not an accurate picture because he legit picks up his lead in his mouth and then tries to walk himself, basically. Because he is very impatient. Anyhow, back to mass murder and genocide. So, essentially... the Chinese armies of this... what the fuck? The Chinese armies at this time essentially had... they weren't like our Western armies. They didn't use artillery. They didn't really stand in neat little lines, you know, fire, back rank fire, etc., then one-sided retreats. It wasn't like that. This was brutal fighting. They would charge in really close quarters, fire their shots off, then basically pull out swords, use bayonets, and just really brutal fighting. Because most of the fighting was in cities and sieges, it was all in the tight corridors and narrow streets. Really, really brutal. As well as that, a big problem was the sheer fanaticism of the Taiping forces. These were zealots. You can't reason with them, you can't negotiate with them. They fought to the last man, to the last bullet, and even beyond that, they were just trying to attack with their bare fists. They're basically like the Japanese army from World War II. They just would not surrender, and they took no quarter either. They did not really like prisoners, and neither did the Qing. The Qing, as we saw from what they did to Hong's corpse, really fucking hated these guys. So if on the very rare occasion a Taiping rebel would surrender, they would just shoot him anyway, as they did not take any prisoners either. Another big thing was there were very, very few decisive victories. Apart from the ones won by the ever-victorious army, coincidence, I think not, British involvement, there were very few decisive victories. Even the Xi'an army, only after the fall of Nanjing did they really start winning clear victories. In all the other ones, where pretty much everybody... Oh, I remember that moment. I remember the mass murder on D47. I think that might be me. I might be the jury running along there, as I remember that very, very, very clearly. Yeah, no, I think I'm that jury, as I remember that. Anyway, back to this. So basically every single battle, when you had a victory, both sides would lose thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of men. And there were very few clear victories. As well as this, another thing is the arms smuggling. This war was a gold mine for the black market and arms dealers. They were selling crates of thousands of weapons to both sides and getting very rich, which naturally prolonged the conflict. Selling artillery guns and weapons made it more deadly, etc., etc. As well as this, a fact to note, 90% of the Taiping rebel forces were killed, either during the war or afterwards. Only 10% escaped. Now, of course, the biggest reason for the amount of deaths is undoubtedly the policy of total war. Defender 7, you might be familiar with this due to it being the policy employed in World War II by you. Essentially, as every single resource gets diverted into the war effort. Everything goes into it. So, for example, the Taiping forces, they just conscripted everyone. They're like, hey, you can hold a rifle? Have a rifle. Hey, you can hold a sword? Have a sword. And essentially, that's what happened. Now, with these policies as well, you have the policy of brutality. Basically, both sides took scorched earth to a whole new level. When Qing forces captured a city, not only did they kill the Taiping defenders, they just massacred everyone they could find in there. When they were on the retreat from the Taiping, they burned farmlands, shot villagers because, denying the enemy potential recruits. They massacred whole cities as they withdrew, and the Taiping did the same. Both sides committed unspeakable atrocities against each other. In fact, around over 80% of the casualties, out of the 70 million dead, I'd say around 65 million of those were civilian casualties from the just mass murder of civilians in the war. And then, of course, you have the Manchu genocide carried out by the Taiping. They basically just shot every Manchu they could find. They'd walk into villages and just kill them all. And this wasn't the systematic eradication used by the aforementioned Nazis in World War II, still being used by the Chinese today with the Uyghurs. This was just random, essentially. This is in the 1850s. The Taiping forces all just went into a town and just shot everyone there and then left. All in all, that's the reason the casualties were so high. It was just this complete war of brutality. That's really the only way I can describe it. That's just what it was, really. And that is why it is the third bloodiest war in history, but also something relatively no one knows about, because it's rather obscure. But it's a very important and fascinating piece of Chinese history. So, do we have any questions? No? Very good. Well, that's going to conclude my talk for today. I hope you all enjoyed. I could tell that this time it was a lot better than last time, which is quite nice. So, thank you all for attending. And, oh, hello, defenders. Irvin is typing. No, I don't reckon that. Yeah.
That's a shame.
We appreciate it, Darth.
Alright, thank you. Well, that's the end of that. If you want to learn more about it, just look it up. It's the Taiping Rebellion, or Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. There you go. Next week we will be covering... Next week we might not actually have one, because I'm going back to school, so I'll be dealing with that. That might, delay things, but it might not. Who knows? We'll see when we come round to this time again tomorrow. Anyhow, well, when the stars align, since half the time it happens, I'm busy doing something else, so it's just a matter of luck.
Hey, Darth, I'm sorry
really?
for the trip, by the way.
Like, for example, in like 2 minutes, I've actually got an event I need to attend for Mountain Blade Warband.